Hello, and welcome to Making Conversations. Today we are making some serious conversations because there has been a lot of crime that's been sweeping across our nation here in our country. And most of this crime, well, I'm not going to say most of the crime, but a lot of the crime has to do with our young youth today. So here to talk about this, I have George Brown, along with Reverend Timothy Troxler, to my right, and I also have with me Reverend Craig Tampton. Tatum, sorry about that, Tatum. So we're going to be here and we're going to discuss some of these things, but first I would like to start off with George. Can you tell me what Ceasefire is all about?
Ceasefire, as a program, Ceasefire is currently in operation in 70 cities across the country. But basically, it's a youth violence intervention initiative. Is basically what it is. Ceasefire is one of those models that you identify this small group of people in a community who are really committing all of the really violent crimes, the shootings, a lot of it related to the drug industry and the drug trade. So law enforcement in the community identify this really small segment of your community that's really driving the violence, and then you target your interventions at that small group. Say, for example, when it started in the city of Boston in the mid-1990s, there were 2 or 3 different street gangs that were having a war over territory. You remember in the mid-80s, crack came, changed the whole drug culture and the drug wars in a lot of these cities. And so when they started having these drug wars, you had these violent gangs that it was like the Wild Wild West, having these shootouts and a lot of killings, murders, things like that, real disruptions in the community. So a man by the name of David Kennedy, who was a law professor at John Jay College, I think, in New York City. He studied and analyzed the data around all these crimes and figured out that to intervene in that, you need to go after this real small targeted population that's really committing all these crimes. And then you do targeted interventions, you do community messaging, you try to pull some of the individuals in the gangs out, employ them in other ways, use education as a tool to re-educate some of these people and make them employable in the regular job market. But basically, Ceasefire is a youth violence intervention measure that's proven to be very, very successful in, like I said, 70 cities across the country.
Okay, and I'm going to direct my question over to Reverend Craig Tampton. What do you think is the cause of a lot of youth violence today?
Well, I think there's a lot of different causes. One is when we look at the parenting structure now in the home. The parenting structure has a tremendous impact on a lot of our young people. A lot of our young people at home between the hours of 3 and even 11, without a parent being there. A lot of our young people are not doing well academically, and so they're trying to figure out a place where they can be accepted. A lot of that involves being out there in the streets, being involved in gangs. As George said earlier, a lot of this stems from the drug culture that has permeated for the last 30 plus years. And we see a lot of young kids now with access to guns. And because of that, we've now got this huge issue, in the inner city where a lot of our young kids see guns as the means to the ends. Of course, if you throw in there a lot of the video games that most kids are just mesmerized by now, they spend every waking moment shooting, killing, and so for a lot of kids it's just the norm now.
Okay, so you would say that most of these young youth are being fascinated by the things that they see on television, and by the arcade games that they go out and purchase and stuff. So mainly this is a lot of the causes to some of the things that they are doing. But one of the other things that you just mentioned, you said that they're not doing good academically, in school and stuff, like that. So what would you say is the problem why they cannot succeed and excel in school? What is basically the problem why these children are not learning?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with structure. And when there isn't any structure in the home, when your parents aren't enforcing and your parents aren't there to enforce academics, then kids seek different ways to amuse themselves. When you look at our school system now, a lot of our schools are overcrowded. They don't have particularly in the inner cities, they don't have the teaching tools and materials that are necessary to help our kids become compatible. When you look at us versus China and some of the other places, I mean, we're not in the top tier in terms of academics for our kids. So even as a nation, we're struggling, and because of that, a lot of our young black males in particular that are involved in street crime and things have not or aren't doing well in school now. And they figure, since I'm not doing well, I might as well go someplace where I can be accepted, where I can make money without having to worry about academics being the key to that. And so they choose the street life.
The street life. Wouldn't it be fair to say that, you know, a lot of children who have parents inside the home, I mean, come from well parents, you know, parents who have professional careers, and they still fail in school. So what would be the problem with that? Let's ask Reverend Troster about that. What do you think about children come from proper homes, but yet they still somehow fail when it comes to academics in school? Is it that they seek attention from outside, or maybe the parents is not paying them a lot of attention at home? So what is really the root to the problem why kids cannot excel in school?
I think there's a few things. One thing is that sometimes we can have a perception that a two-parent home is better than a single-parent home.
Right.
But if you look at a lot of statistics, it doesn't prove that. There's some dynamics going on there. There can be some, still with those parents there and well-to-do parents, there still could be a lack of, as Pastor Tatum said, structure and a system there. And then sometimes, unfortunately, kids with well-to-do parents, well-to-do home, that doesn't fit in their social structure. So sometimes they will act out on purpose so that they can fit in better with the crowd over here. Then they're not interested so much in fitting in with their parents. They would still rather be accepted, if you will, or cool to do these things, which I know I shouldn't be doing, but I'm accepted there. I don't want to be labeled a square or a nerd, we used to call them, or whatever it is. So even with that system, again, it could lead to them not so much rebelling, but just, again, wanting to be accepted in that social crowd. And now you've got all the social media, you've got everything, and you don't want to be considered uncool, because anything like that could get out and then kind of set you aside from the in crowd.
Right.
So that could be obviously one of the things there. Communication breakdown. Again, if the children have a problem and they want to go talk to the parents, sometimes as parents we push them away instead of listening to them, and then because we push them away, now they'll go get answers, if you will, or guidance from a source or system that's not consistent with productive behavior, and that can lead, of course, to some other things there.
Mr. Letammarr, too, just kind of responding to what Reverend Trockler just said, this is where community engagement comes in, because what you heard them just describe is young people getting away from this civilized idea of how you can exist in a city. One of the things that Ceasefire seeks to address is to change community norms around violence, around illegal behavior, that kind of thing. And a lot of our communities, especially in the black community,
Right.
this illicit and illegal behavior has become a normal way of doing business. Nowadays in the black community, a young black kid gets shot, it's almost like a matter of fact kind of an occurrence. Part of it goes back to the video games, I think, and the way people live, but it seems like a lot of people in our society have become desensitized to murder, mayhem, and other kinds of violence. So around Ceasefire, one of the things that happens, you build community support around an initiative like this, and the community, especially your clergy, who are leaders in a movement like this, they're trying to reestablish what the community accepted behaviors are going to be. Just like you make jeans, a certain style of sneaker, a certain way of speaking, just like you make that popular, clergy and other voices in the community can reverse that trend and make positive and better behaviors the normal way of doing business. We engage clergy, we engage law enforcement, we engage your schools, we engage all your social services agencies to wrap services around some of these young people that we try to pull out of this negative behavior. But if you pull them out, you have to have something to replace that with. A lot of these kids are going to need help getting their GEDs, to be educated and be made job ready. Some of these young people have psychological issues. Other ones have substance and alcohol abuse issues. Other ones have psychological issues that have to do with their upbringing. So in order to make an initiative like Ceasefire successful and appropriate, it requires total community engagement, positive messaging, reinforcement from your local police. In our black communities, we have this stigma that says if you know that somebody committed a crime,
Right.
it's against the black community's norm to inform law enforcement authorities that here's the person that you're looking for who committed this heinous crime. Now that's the norm in a lot of black communities. The Ceasefire initiative and the messaging around that seek to change that norm away from keeping the information secret to working more closely with the police to try to get a handle on this small population of people who are really upsetting the cart community-wise.
Now you said, even with that small population of people, one would probably call the police when they hear of a crime, and then others probably would not call the police when they hear of a crime. And the ones who do call the police when there's a certain crime going on, they are labeled to be a snitch.
Absolutely.
So therefore, they don't want to speak out. They fear that their families might be harmed, because of that, and they feel that it's just not cool for them to snitch. But as parents, what can we do to help our children overcome some of the barriers that is going on? Now, I must say that a lot of parents are not parents, though. A lot of children are having children, and they don't understand what it is to be a grown-up and to be responsible. I used to tell kids all the time, don't reach for something beyond your reach. If you're worth only $5, then that's all it is. It's $5. That's all that you are worth. Don't think that you can take a pocket full of drugs, or go break into someone's house, or go rob someone's mom or sister or daughter on the street just for your own need. So as parents, what is it that we're not doing? And I'd like the Reverend Tantrum to address that.
Well, I think one of the things, and at one point in time, there was an African proverb that said it takes an entire village to raise a child. And at some point, we've got to re-engage ourselves as a community, and even more personal within our own neighborhoods. We now live in neighborhoods where we're pretty much isolated from the people that live next door to us. We don't even know them. And because we don't know them, there's a tendency for me not to be interested in the things that go on. By the same token, there's this hysteria or fear in the community that if I do snitch, if I do say something, and there isn't any action, then those that have done the crime will ultimately come back and do something to me. So I think what normally has to happen is there needs to be block captains that will start in the neighborhoods. There has to be a sense of trust. We have to get to know each other. And we have to begin to lay down some sense of standard in terms of what's going to be accepted and what's not accepted. The community I came from years ago, and this was many years ago, but you could be disciplined by the neighbor. The neighbor could discipline you, and then they would call your mom, and by the time you got home, your neighbor would discipline you, and then you'd get home, and then your mom would discipline you. I mean, there was that type of structure in our communities. The question really becomes, can we get back to that same type of structure? A lot of it has to start with, do we trust each other's neighbors? Are we willing to stand up and provide a sense of structure for our neighborhood, one block at a time? So I think we have to go back to getting to know our neighbors, beginning to establish some sense of trust. We have to know who lives in our neighborhoods, because we don't even know who lives in our neighborhoods now. So I think a lot of it has to do with that. We have to have more open dialogue with our school systems, with our police. Police do their job, but the policing really needs to happen within the neighborhood. Back in the day, our mothers sat on porches, our dads were out in the yards doing work, and we policed everything. And we're so much into this instant gratification type of world now where that no longer exists.
Right.
So we got to go back to some of those things.
Right. I remember when I was growing up, I'm from a large city, Chicago. A lot of people probably know that. our fathers were called soul patrols, and they would be the ones who would come around the neighborhood and patrol the neighborhood.
Right.
You know, we bad things that we done was like running through the alley, knocking over the neighbor's garbage can. That was considered to be bad. I might say that the neighbor across the street was telling a lie. Oh, did I get a beating for that?
Okay.
You know, those was little bad things that we would do. You know, maybe every now and then we probably snuck in the store and stole an ice cream sandwich though. Got whooping for that. You know, little bad things like that we would do in a large city. But in a small town, and I want to direct this question to Reverend Daxter, in a small town, why is it so much crime in a small town? In the last 6 months, I have read, I have listened to so much violence in a small community. It is unreal. You know, it takes the cake. It's the crime that I have, I haven't witnessed no crime here, but most of the crimes that I read about and I heard over the news are way more prevalent than the crimes that you would hear from a larger city like Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, and even New York. So what is the problem?
Not only is it a small town, but usually the crimes are committed in a small area.
Right.
And it gets back to something that you said about the fathers being on patrol. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of fathers in the lives of the young men.
Absolutely.
And that's where we, as clergy, as community leaders, that's where we come in. And even though we're obviously not the biological father, we can serve, if you will, as a spiritual father,
dad, yeah.
surrogate father, or even a father figure. And again, small town, the crimes happen in small areas, and the reason that we have a lot of these unsolved crimes is because, once again, people feel that I can't snitch, I can't do this, I can't tell, so it just continues to happen because they feel safe knowing the attitude, if you will, of the people around them, and they know that no one is going to say anything. So it's a small pocket, but it's a small enough pocket for you to hide a big problem. And that's, unfortunately, some of the things that take place there. Something that George mentioned, that word reverse, that's got to be, we've got to reverse this. I was reading just today, Centers for Disease Control, reported by Bloomberg magazine, says that 85 Americans die daily by gunshot. 53% of 53 of those are suicide. And then out of the people in those killed daily, they're either 14 or younger. And then it's estimated that in the year 2015, more people have died by gunshot than automobiles. So we have to reverse this trend. We have to reverse a mindset. You see a lot of stuff with gun control. What we need is mind control. Because I don't think there's anything worse than having a guided missile in a misguided mind. And that's what seems to be taking place.
And George, what do you think is a major problem, in these small towns? Why children are not learning, why children are going to the streets, why children are in drugs. I know that some parts of it is because parents are not being parents, and that's just point blank. How can you sit up and smoke crack with your own mama? How can you sit up and have a drink with your dad? When I was growing up, I never heard of crack cocaine. If you heard of someone smoking weed, that was whoa. You didn't even associate with that person. But how can a child have a chance of becoming somebody when their parents don't even show them an example of how to even be anybody? You got kids walking around here, don't know what they're doing, haven't been nowhere, not going anywhere, and they don't even know how to get anywhere though. So how can we change this around? I know we can't be the parents for the whole community. You know, some of these parents who's going to have to wake up and take responsibility on their own. This is your child. This is not my child. You know, but go ahead.
A lot of times in these communities, whether it be small communities, medium-sized or large, communities have to realize or have to hear the moral voice of that community. In the city of Battle Creek, which is a wonderful city, wonderful assets here, wonderful people here, when people get away from accepted civilized behavior, all kind of things can happen. Now with the young people are influenced by a lot of things. What they see on TV, what they hear in music, what they read in magazines, what a group of people in another community are doing. So young people traditionally have always been easy to be influenced.
So they pretty much brainwashed is what you're trying to say.
I wouldn't say brainwashed, but one of the things about American culture is that a big deal for us is people want to fit in. They want to belong to a group. They want to be in a neighborhood or in a group or on a team. And so one of the things that happen is once you get away from civilized behavior and civilized society, some of those things or groups that people join all the time are not the best,
Right.
at least from my own personal perspective. I'm almost 60 years old. And just like Reverend Troxler was saying, and Reverend Tatum both, we were raised in a different time under different sets of rules and guidelines. In the 40s, 50s, 60s, different things were accepted in the community. When I was coming up, even the mention of a handgun, I mean, everybody's mother and father was like, where did that thing come from? Let's get it and turn it in or get rid of it. Nowadays, it seems like it's different. It's accepted behavior for young people to have guns.
Right.
It's accepted behavior for young people to go unsupervised and be gone from home for hours at a time. And their parents, because parents are engaged trying to earn money to pay bills or deal with their own set of particular circumstances, a lot of times these young parents can't really supervise young people. So what you do in response to that, and you intimated at it before, is that the entire community now has to step in and be like a surrogate, kind of a family for a lot of these people. I know a lot of people that I've met here in Battle Creek who are young people who have 2 or 3 kids already. A lot of these young people just don't have all the skills and the knowledge to be able to really sufficiently parent a young child.
Right.
So a lot of times then the community has to step in, wrap their arms around that kind of situation, and you see it happening a lot in Battle Creek, where I'm from in Jackson. You see it happening a lot, but it sometimes it doesn't reach to those depths that you need it to reach to. So under a program like a ceasefire, that's what we do. Your clergy become the moral voice of the community, and they're the ones that are helping spread the message of we're not going to tolerate this violence anymore. We're not going to tolerate especially the serious violence using handguns that are murdering our young people. So you have a stronger moral voice, and then you have the local law enforcement community that's saying, we don't want to lock you up. We don't want to be in your neighborhood kicking in doors. But unless you get with this program where we're going to try to help you get out of this violent and gang lifestyle, if you don't really buy into that, you're going to realize the full force of what law enforcement can bring. If you go back and look at some of the examples like in Boston and Chicago, that was one of the most successful things, is when the community said, we're not going to take this anymore, and at the same time law enforcement said, okay, the community is going to provide services to help you, but the minute you go outside of that, we're going to kick in all the drug doors. We're going to start giving people tickets for drinking outside. We're going to start giving people tickets for jaywalking. We're going to be a really serious presence in your lives and in your crime community. So people in the criminal drug trade and are doing other illegal things, they don't want to get that attention from the police. One of the things that they went through psychologically was, we better get with this program or else they're going to interrupt everything else that we're doing. We can't sell our drugs anymore. We can't socialize on the street corner anymore, because the minute we step out, here comes law enforcement. But law enforcement is responding to people's inability to behave in a civilized fashion, especially pertaining to gun violence. So there are a lot of initiatives that can work. There are a lot of things that can work. But in order for any of these things to be successful, the entire community has to wrap their arms around this serious problem that we have that only affects directly a small percentage of our population, but it can tend to infect and poison the rest of the community, because who wants to go into a neighborhood where crime and violence are the normal thing?
Right.
Who wants to send their kids to a school where around that school there's crime and violence happening all the time? So what we need is for the moral voice from our clergy to step up and say, we're not going to deal with that any longer. And we're going to be the ones in our own black community to say, young Joe, if you're out there committing crimes, we're going to be the first one to call 911 and say, here's where our problem is at. And so it takes all these different components to kind of change these things around in the community, to reduce the level of serious gun violence, to bring kids back to an understanding that getting your education is important, to bring parents back to the realization that the most important thing they can do is be a super good parent to that child and try to raise them in the best way that they know how. So under ceasefire, under some of these other initiatives that we can put in place, this is what we hope to see happen in cities all across the state of Michigan, because as organizers, we're trying to get it to the point where ceasefire can be a statewide initiative that's in place in all of our major cities in the state of Michigan. But we need resources from the highest levels, we need cooperation from the highest levels, but more than anything else, we need people in these individual communities to step up and say, we're going to take control of the situation, we're not going to tolerate this violence and this shooting of our young people any longer, just like you see them doing nationally. After this thing that happened in Connecticut, the whole country now, every newspaper you pick up, the whole country is all thinking about gun control and how can we prevent some of this violence from occurring in our cities even further. So one of the things I learned from my dad is when you're doing something important, remember to strike when the iron is hot. While this conversation is on everybody's lips, this is when we should be trying to really promote some of these initiatives and some of this new thinking about how can we raise our young people? How can we prevent our young people from going off the deep end with crime, violence, and drugs and those kind of things?
I think one of the other components to ceasefire that needs to be lifted as well is that, yes, as clergy, we will, step up to the plate and become the moral voice. But I think the other key, when we talk about this small group of individuals, part of another part of a ceasefire is where you bring individuals that have lived that lifestyle, and you bring them out, those that are tired of it, those that want to see things change. Because the reality is, I don't know the kids that's out there carrying the guns, but maybe this guy does, because he's been out there, he's been a part of that culture. You now bring him on and you bring him, and part of what ceasefire has done in other cities is you bring those people, you employ them to spend the time out there when this activity is going on for the purpose of counseling and providing direction and kind of, squashing a lot of that stuff that happens. You provide them with the resources, the training, and all those things there, and it goes on for a period of time. And now, one of the reasons why a lot of kids are involved in crime is because they've lived such a negative lifestyle and they have such a huge rap sheet in terms of crime that they can't find a job. And so they say, okay, I can't find a job, nobody will hire me, I might as well go back to what I know best. So we get this, repetitious cycle continue to occur. Dad did it, I'm going to do it, nephew's going to do it, and it just becomes a family issue. So I think our job, as Georgia said, is to say, okay, enough is enough. We're going to do everything that we can to help you understand, why this is impacting our community. I mean, crime impacts not just a certain segment, but it impacts the entire community. When crime is high in your communities, no major corporation will come in that community. So people have to see the overall picture. But I think it's our job as pastors, as clergy, and others to come together and figure out a way to reach out to those guys that really want to come out of that life, to empower them, to put them on the right track, give them all the support they need to then go back in and reach these guys that are just, this is what they do for a living, and try to help them recognize that we don't need this to continue.
Amen.
Yeah, very well said. What is it that we can do, and I'm going to ask Reverend after that, what can we do to save our children from this destruction of violence? What is it that we're not doing to save our children?
I think what we can do to help save them, getting back again to what George said, is just touches, personal touches, especially those, as you mentioned, without the parents just non-existent. For example, that teacher, to grab that child, hug that child, you can do it. That coach, that Sunday school teacher, that neighbor, you may be out, your kid, you may be out shoveling, the neighbor's kid or somebody may come by and you say, hey, why don't you give me a hand? I'll tell you what, here's a shovel, do this, have him work, pay him for this thing. Just put positive, always positive affirmations. And when you create touches, I believe you create relationships. One of the reasons now that we're afraid of everybody is because we don't know everybody. I was watching a story yesterday on CBS News where the police in Kalamazoo, they took kids shopping. And one of the kids said, I was afraid of the police until this happened. And now I no longer fear them.
Mm-hmm.
So now you may have put something in his head. The young guy says, you know what? I'm going to grow up to now, I want to be a public safety officer. Or I want to do this, or I want to do that. Be it coach, mentor. We can do those things, but a lot of times we're too busy, I think, not helping is because, again, we're afraid of kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's easier to criticize and point as opposed to getting in the game, trying to figure out even, what the problem is, where the problem lies. So I think there's more we can do as adults, as leaders, and just as people. And again, simple touches. It doesn't require money, doesn't require a lot of resources. Common sense, love, compassion, and just consideration, and sometimes just listening to the kid, because sometimes they will come to us, and sometimes we put up a holy front, and we just don't want to listen to them. We shut them down, and then they go do something, but yet that child came to me,
Right.
and I was too busy for him, or I didn't want to listen to him because we don't do that. So if we're not careful, we can actually push them further
Absolutely.
into something that we're trying to keep them out of with our stance. So we have to understand that as parents, we don't have all the answers, and we need to be honest with our children, and children saying, I made mistakes as well, instead of putting up this persona where I place myself on such a high pedestal. Now I put into your head that, shucks, I could never do that. So it just pushes me further back.
Right.
As opposed to giving you a hand, I'm actually pushing you down instead of lifting you up.
Well, a lot of people are caught up in trepidation. And so, George, I want to ask you, what can we do to help some of these people overcome the fears that they have? I do know that guns are used for only one thing, and that is to kill. And a lot of the youngsters, not only youngsters though, because we have people in their 30s and 40s that are playing around with guns and doing foolish things. Later on in the show, we have this thing that's called a fool in a box. And we're going to talk about the fool in that black box. But we're not going to talk about it right now, because I think this ceasefire thing is something really important that we need to get clear and make clear to the young people. Guns are only for you to pick up to kill someone. But a lot of people don't think about the preconcussions that you leave on the family after the deceased person is gone, or you went out and done something foolish. You don't realize, how it affects your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister.
That's one of the main components of ceasefire. Is, say, for example, last weekend there might have been a shooting, might have been gang related, might have been drug related. But typically, when there's a shooting, somebody out in the community is thinking about retaliation. This is where one of the components of ceasefire steps in. We have these what are called violence interrupters, who are former gang members, former people who have lived that street life.
Right.
A shooting happens last weekend. Immediately, these people come into the community because they know there's going to be repercussions and a revenge. They go to the people involved in that, engage with them, and say, there's a better way for us to resolve this. We know that your uncle, your brother, somebody got shot last weekend, but in order to prevent this from escalating out of control, let's look at some different ways for us to resolve these differences. Let's work with local law enforcement. Let's work with whomever we can work with to keep these people from continuing this cycle of violence. Let me give you some facts from ceasefire. Typically, the strategy is that violence can be dramatically reduced within any city where law enforcement members and community join together to engage with different groups on three things. A law enforcement message that any future violence will be met with clear, predictable, and certain consequences. Number two, a moral message, which is where our clergy come in, against violence by the right community representatives. Number three, an offer of help for those who want it. And it just goes back to say that if you want to get with the system, we can help you. Offer of help for those who want it. So everybody doesn't have to stay on this vicious cycle of crime and killing and that kind of thing. We're going to put together some alternatives to that. Ceasefire now, like I said before, has been implemented in more than 70 cities nationwide, and it typically reduces homicides by from 35 to 50%. Non-fatal shootings are also reduced, but only to a lesser degree. So we know, because of the data that we've looked at and because of all the studies around these ceasefire initiatives in all these major cities, we know it can work. We know that the messaging is right. What we don't know is, when is the community going to say we've had enough and be willing to step out of what they've been doing to try something new that could work for them?
You know, the community may say they had enough. The community might complain about having enough, but the community doesn't stick together to let everyone know that enough is enough. How many more funerals must we attend?
I heard an interesting story from the Battle Creek Police Chief, Jackie Hampton. Very nice and very knowledgeable man, very committed to law enforcement in this community. But he told me when I first came here in May to start my job as an organizer at Creating Change, he says, George, whenever something bad happens here, this community will typically do something called a rain dance. A shooting will happen, people will get upset, they might even march or protest. He said, but after a week or two, the focus goes away from that, and then next thing you know, we have another shooting to respond to. Right. So one of the things that he talked about when I first went to him, because we met and had a discussion about whether or not he thought ceasefire was a good program. We looked at all the background information. Him and some of his lieutenants thought it was a good initiative, but they said it can only work if the entire community will embrace it.
Right.
Instead of doing that typical rain dance, we need the entire community to understand how important this could be and how this could be a watershed moment for Battle Creek. So we know that our law enforcement leaders like the program.
Right.
We know that our clergy like the program. So now it's up to us to spread the message in the rest of the community, to explain how this works, try to pull in all of the necessary resources. And Battle Creek is a city that's full of wonderful people and great resources. So if we can pull those elements together, I have no doubt that we can help make Battle Creek a safer city. We can help give Battle Creek's youth better and greater opportunity to succeed, because in this community, there's all kinds of initiatives that are lined up to help these kids from kindergarten through their 12th grade in high school. There's all kinds of other programs really focused on helping these kids succeed, but a lot of times they get moved off the track by things that happen in their personal life and with their peers in the streets. So we know we have a great situation here. We know we have support, but we need to have the whole community wrap their arms around this concept. And I have no doubt that we can make it effective here. We can do it in Lansing, Jackson. It's already happening in Detroit. Kalamazoo has a ceasefire initiative in place. Their police chief, I can't remember his name, he carved out $250,000 out of his own police budget to put into ceasefire funding. So we know that communities like it. We know that communities will support it. How much will they support it here in Battle Creek is yet to be seen, but we're going to spend a good chunk of the first part of 2013 trying to build some community support around everybody coming together to try to defeat this problem.
Okay. Anyone can answer this next question. I would like to know, do you know what the local officials are not doing, to try to try to change things around in the community? I mean, because, when we look at our local officials, as leaders, let's just face it, as leaders. But some of our local officials would sit down and do nothing, absolutely nothing. So how is it that we can get their attention to let them know this is a serious thing? This ceasefire thing is very serious, though. This gun thing is very serious. These drugs is out of control. That's very serious. And this is a serious show. This show, the reason why I wanted to do this show is because I wanted to have real conversations with real people about real things that are affecting our community and what we can do to turn it around. I'm grateful that I had an opportunity to grow up, to be a child. I'm grateful to be able to live overseas, to have a broad education. I'm very grateful, and I thank God for allowing me to travel this journey alone by myself, but he was there with me, because I couldn't have done none of it by myself. Couldn't have done none of it. So I'm so grateful to God that he saw something different in me when I was coming along than my other brothers and sisters, and I'm just grateful that I was given an opportunity to do something with my
And
life.
as a
So,
community, we need
yeah.
to make sure that we give other young people that same kind of an
Same
opportunity
opportunity.
to grow and
Right.
prosper. In this community, we have elected officials. I won't even go down the list of naming them, but they're very concerned about some of these
Right.
issues. We have law enforcement that's very, very concerned about this issue. But one of the things that blocks things like this from taking hold is that a lot of times the entire community won't engage.
Right.
One of the things when you talk to law enforcement officials, a crime will happen. They'll be there within 5 minutes to start
Right.
asking questions. All of a sudden, nobody saw anything. Nobody
Right.
knows anything.
That's the problem.
Even though we know that the people that were directly there and involved, they know the answers to some of these questions,
Right.
but they won't give that information to police. So that's a frustrating thing for elected officials, for law enforcement officials, for social service agency workers. It's just a big problem when people won't cooperate and work with others to try to solve some of these problems. But I think you can get a better picture of that by talking to these two local clergy members who have a really good handle on the pulse of this community. We're looking for them to be that voice, to get out there and help us build support around this. We're looking for them to reach out in their congregations, to talk to the kids in the schools, to be everywhere that they can to try to extend this message. So I think that's a question that's better asked of our local
Well,
clergy.
Reverend Charleston, what would you like to see change? You know, and what can we change in the community? You know, to bring all people together for the good of the community.
We need to, first of all, as I said, our mindset needs to change, because right now, it appears as if we're almost selfish, in a sense that if your kid is having a problem, then that's your problem,
Right.
and that's your kid, and that's bad parenting. But then the minute my kid has a problem, now it's an epidemic.
There you go.
But we need to be just as concerned about every child, every injustice, every act that's not right. Even though it may not directly affect us, we don't understand that it does indirectly affect us,
Right.
and it will be coming closer to us.
Absolutely.
I think one of the things we can do, with your question to those, say, officials, elected officials that may not be doing what they should do, I think we can hold them to the fire. We can take part in, when they have the Ask the Candidate, they have panels, they have things where you can kind of get to know things. We have those open sessions. We can, city commission meetings, city hall, city council, because just like our votes put them in, if they don't do what they promise or pledge to do, then those same votes can take them out.
Absolutely.
But again, that's going to involve the community and everyone as well. Sometimes we don't think problems pertain to us until they land on our front door, and then it's almost at that point, you know, too late. And then some of them people have burned every bridge, so now you want everybody to help you, and we've, you know, burned all these relationships that we had.
Right.
So again, it's just a cycle, and we need to get somehow out of that cycle and change our own minds and views, and, you know, not let our worldview be the worldview. But I really think that we really need to be concerned more with others, you know, the neighborhood, the community, as opposed to, as long as me and mine are okay, then everything is okay. It's not, because sooner or later, it's coming to my house.
Absolutely.
So preventive, as they say, an ounce of prevention is better than a
Pound of cure.
pound of cure. So there's some things we can head off, but we got to take our heads out of the sand and wake up to reality.
Right.
I mean,
Very,
you know,
very important
acting
words
like
there.
something is not there is not going to make it
Right.
go away.
Because we have far too many people dying for senseless things, though. You know, and that troubles me, and it should trouble them too. It should trouble every home in the community when you lose someone real young, you know, or even if you lose someone before the age of 50. You know, a lot of people say that 50 years old is old. Oh, you're really old at 50. But die at 50. And they say, oh, he was so young. You know, try dying at 50, you know. So, you know, I don't know what it's going to really take, you know, to change things around in this community. But I would say that ceasefire is a great start. You know, it's the number one start. You know, and I believe that a lot of people should support this, get behind it. I'm behind it. I know that the Letammarr TV show is behind it. You know, and that's why we're here making conversations today, because I stand behind this 100%. And this is something that we all need to come together, you know, and stand up for it. We are losing our kids. People are dying. You know, I don't want to lose my child. I don't want to lose a niece or a nephew just because of some ignoramus came about and decided that they should not live, you know, acting as God, you know. But a lot of people these days, they don't fear God. Oh, they think that, oh, it's no God. I can do whatever I want, you know, anytime I want to do it, you know. And so what? If I go to hell, I'm going to be in hell with my friends, and we're just going to continue, and we're going to party there. But what they don't know is that when you go to hell, you're in hell alone. Ha. They don't understand that part. You are in your own hell alone to torment yourself alone. There's no socialization in hell, not even with the devil. You know, so, you know, I hope people wake up.
You're preaching now, Mr. Latimer.
There you go. There you go.
You know, so,
I know we sure do appreciate the opportunity to come
Right.
here to have this conversation, because we all, and a lot of people in the community, agree that this is a very important conversation worth having. So, in any avenue that we can take advantage of to help us spread this message, we're always, you know, very willing and very able and excited to go out and talk to the community about this. But like I say, beginning of next year marks a new starting point for the city of Battle Creek, and if we can pull together the necessary resources and really get the community to wrap their arms around this movement, we feel very confident that this could be something that could be good for Battle Creek. Then if it works here, it could work all over the rest of the state. So we're just very appreciative of an opportunity to come before the cameras to talk about this.
now, if someone needs to contact you, now how can they contact Ceasefire?
They can reach me at Creating Change. Yeah, typically I give people my cell phone number, and if you don't mind, I'll give my cell phone number right here on the air. 517-740-5743 is my cell phone number. People can call that number any time of day or night. If there's an issue, or they want more information, or they want to help us engage in ceasefire, they can do that. I'm at Creating Change in Battle Creek, and our Creating Change email address, creatingchange@sbcglobal.net. They can reach us that way through email. We meet the second Thursday of every month at 6 p.m. over at Trinity Lutheran Church, is where we have our regular Creating Change board meetings and our regular meetings. People know where we're located. We're at 2055 East Columbia Avenue. If you want more information about ceasefire or have some other ideas that can help us with this initiative, we encourage everybody to reach out to us. You can contact one of these two pastors here who are very deeply rooted in this community. Both of them are trying to wrap their hands around what they can do to uplift people in their neighborhoods, around their churches and congregations. So you can contact any of us, and if you need more information about ceasefire or need some direction, we could help you with that. So we're very much encouraging the public to, you can go online, type in ceasefire into your search engine. You're going to find out all kinds of wonderful information about how ceasefire started, some of the pitfalls, how it works, look at some of the data that's been collected around this initiative. So over the next year, we hope to be able to put that information out there so everybody can have a nice handle around this, but we're also going to be looking to draw people in services and institutions into this movement.
Okay, very well. I'm going to ask, before we go, I would like to ask Reverend Craig Tantum to make an impact statement for me, so people can understand how important that this really is. You know, especially in a small community where everyone are so crammed up together, I would say. Make a statement for me.
Well, my mind goes back to July of this year, where we had the killings at the Sikh temple in, I think, Wisconsin. Then about a month or so later, there was a shooting in Colorado at the movie theater where we lost multiple lives. Yet even here in the city of Battle Creek, Michigan, Since 1968, there are still 83 unsolved murders. Guns don't kill, people kill.
Right.
And what we have to do is change the mindset of people. You do that by impressing and using, a set of standards, a moral standards, if you will, to encourage people to understand that we've got to change our mindset. So there's got to be a paradigm shift in terms of how we think about guns and violence and videos and music and all the other things. A lot of that's all mixed together with poverty, it's mixed together with drugs, it's mixed together with those that are involved in crime. If we can get people to understand that it takes an entire village to raise a child, we can decrease the crime that happens in this community.
Good, very well said. And Reverend Counselor, what about your impact statement?
I think on the terms of what Dr. Martin Luther King said, if we don't come together as brothers, that we're going to perish together as fools. Again, we need to all the differences, the petty differences, the racial differences, the denomination differences, the economic differences, all that has to go. And we need to come together as one. And come together, as you said, and say enough is really enough. And until we do that, nothing's going to happen. We can't use this as like sometimes we do in evangelism. I call it drive-by evangelism. Say church goes out one day and they don't do anything else, and
Right.
they put it on the calendar once a year. Then the people in the community know that you're not really serious. So once we stay to it, then people may start picking up, because a lot of people won't get on a train until it's moving. And someone said, even though God has all power, even he cannot steer a parked car. So if we're parked and not going anywhere, then why would anyone want to get on the train?
Right. Very well said.
I'd like to add one final thing. Yesterday, we were in Lansing, engaging with our governor, Governor Snyder, and I want to say publicly, I want to thank him publicly for vetoing that legislation yesterday that he vetoed. The legislation, had it been signed into law, would have permitted people with concealed weapons to go into churches, schools, libraries, civic arenas, almost anywhere they can with a concealed weapon. And I'm sure that these two men from the clergy here would say, no, I don't think we really want people with concealed weapons in our churches. One of the little known facts about some of this gun law here in Michigan is that because we have an open carry law in Michigan, you can actually put a holster on your hip and walk into the church anyway. You can show the gun, but now because he vetoed that piece of legislation yesterday, you cannot have a concealed weapon. So there was a group of us clergy from around the state of Michigan, and I'm not clergy, I'm just a layperson, but I helped organize this group of clergy that went to Lansing to meet with the governor to encourage him to veto that piece of legislation. And right around 3:30 yesterday afternoon, while we were forming outside doing our press conference and having a prayer vigil, the governor signed a vetoed that bill. So I'd like to publicly thank our governor, which I very rarely do. I'd like to thank him for signing that piece of legislation, and we would implore the governor to continue to work with clergy and other members of these communities to help us wrap our arms around this serious issue of gun violence and our youth being just, cast off to wherever. So thank you, Mr. Governor, but we sure appreciate you continuing to work with us while we try to impact these communities in another and better way.
Okay. I would like to thank each and one of you for being on the show today. And please come back. We definitely support Ceasefire on the Letammarr TV show. We're definitely going to support this. So I advise every parent to get behind Ceasefire and make that change. You need to make that change. I need to make that change. The world needs to make a change. So I want to thank you guys for being on the show. And please come again.
Thank you, sir, for having
on the show. Too.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.